Hey guys, so I know you can't see my face, so this is just a reminder. I'm Maddie, and for this assignment I chose to focus on the homebound geriatric population and basically all the problems that they face in society. Okay, so in this presentation I'm going to touch on why this is such a major issue due to first off, the huge growth in the population. I'm also going to go into detail about both the mental and physical illnesses that they are prone to, some issues with insurance and funding, and issues that they face when it comes to using technology. So, a major concern is that the geriatric population will see quite a bit of growth in the next couple of decades due to the baby boomer generation aging. Census data shows that by the year 2030, 20% of the population, or 1 in 5, will be over the age of 65. So right now, only about 15% of the population is over age 65, so that is a pretty substantial difference. Out of the 35 million elderly today, about 3.6 million of them are considered homebound. So what is homebound? A person is considered homebound when they can't complete daily living tasks without the assistance of someone or something, or if their mental and physical conditions would worsen if they left the home. So on this slide, I just presented you guys with some of the most common mental and physical health conditions the population is prone to. So for mental health, we see anxiety, cognitive impairment, depression, bipolar, social isolation, and dementia. Physical health, this is just a few, but there's a lot more. Cardiovascular, cerebrovascular, musculoskeletal disease, and this population is obviously very prone to falling. Something interesting was that if the person suffers from depression, they're actually more likely to fall. So in the homebound geriatric population, over 40% suffer from 2 to 3 mental or physical conditions, and over 30% have 4 or more. So it's the prevalence is high. An interesting statistic that I found was that even with the high prevalence of the mental health disorders, only about 1.7% are actually receiving mental health services. Oftentimes, their conditions are not even diagnosed. I think it was like 80% were not even diagnosed. And this is just simply due to a lack of home health service providers in the community. So this population goes mostly untreated. Another issue that this population faces is a lack of access to technology, which is a huge part of the medical world these days. I know myself, I think probably anybody does this. Just if you start experiencing symptoms or something, you're going to Google it and you're going to, WebMD yourself and probably come up with something crazy. But point is, this population can't do that. Most of the homebound elderly reported that they don't use technology due to a list of things: functional impairment, visual deficits, joint pain, just a general mistrust of technology, or the inability to afford the internet. So this statistic you see on the slide, so only 17% of individuals over the age of 60 use the internet, and so this leaves 80% without access to the big sources of information like the ones I listed on the slide. Research has shown that 80% that aren't utilizing technology experience worse physical and functional health, greater feelings of loneliness and social isolation, and they have fewer social resources. So this slide is about the funding and insurance issues. As you can see from the data that I listed, most of the geriatric population relies on Medicare for insurance. Unfortunately, Medicare only provides basic health care and does not cover dental care, vision, hearing aids, dentures, and even some prescriptions. Medicare is also what's called fee-for-service based. So the providers are not able to bill for the extensive time spent if they did make home health visits. So they just can't do that anymore. So a lot of providers find themselves being forced to focus on quantity over quality. So they do, all their visits in the office, which is something that you and I do all the time, but the homebound can't do that. They're homebound. Some providers do offer home health care, but they've reported that they just don't have enough personnel to keep up with the demand, and they don't have the funds to hire more. So, since Medicare does not cover dental needs, most of the homebound geriatrics simply just don't receive services. Oral health has been linked to not only personal morale and stress levels, but also stroke, cardiovascular disease, and atherosclerosis. So if the individual is experiencing pain when they eat, they're probably not going to eat properly, so then they become malnourished. There are some programs that are put in place, which I listed on the slide, like the Older Americans Act and medical nutrition therapy through Medicare. So those are put in place to assist the homebound with proper nutrition, but they either don't have proper funding or they just can't keep up with the growth. So an interesting and sad statistic that I threw up on the slide is that 15% of the homebound elderly are malnourished. And another thing, I didn't put this on the slide, but so 0.4% of dental services that were received were paid for by Medicare, but 75% of them were paid out of pocket. So some people just don't have the means for that, so they just don't receive services. So another issue that came up a lot in my research was the lack of training in geriatric healthcare. So for one, oftentimes those providing the home health services are only providing supportive services and not medical or mental health care. And a lot of times they're just like volunteers or case managers that they don't have the training in the medical and mental health aspects. Data also showed that only 67% of dental schools offer a geriatric clinical rotation, and most medical schools don't provide training in geriatric care. Individuals have also reported that due to the fragility, medical complexity, and frequent deaths within the population, provider turnover is very high because they just can't handle the stress. So I kind of already touched on the importance, but the main reason this social problem is relevant to us as social workers is because the homebound elderly population is going to grow and take up a huge portion of the population in just the coming decades. We can obviously respond to the issues by advocating for better health care for the homebound geriatric and just create more awareness of the problem, because some people just aren't aware that this is even an issue. I know I didn't know a lot of these problems until I did the research for this assignment. These are just some interesting statistics I found in the research on the basic demographics of the problem. So females were more likely than males to be homebound, and most of the homebound were widowed or divorced, which left them more socially isolated than if they were married. It also seemed that individuals of non-Caucasian race experienced more of the problems presented in this slideshow. So just in conclusion, and a few takeaways from this presentation are that first off, the homebound geriatric population is going to grow a lot in the coming years, so this problem is just going to get worse unless someone like us advocates for them. This population is one that suffers from many illnesses that often go undiagnosed or untreated due to lack of providers in general and lack of providers with appropriate training. Although there are some programs put in place to help this population, such as Meals on Wheels and the ones I touched on earlier, they're either not able to keep up with the demand or they're just not sufficient. Due to this population being homebound, they are often forgotten and overlooked, which only worsens their conditions. This is a population that is going to need our attention more than ever in just a few short years unless some big changes are made.